What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late-night set expecting a respectful conversation, only to be blindsided by a host who thinks his platform gives him the right to say whatever he wants? In just 35 seconds of careless words, Jon Stewart would ignite a confrontation that would leave his audience gasping and force a legendary actor to make a choice no guest should ever have to make. The studio lights were bright that evening as Denzel Washington walked out to thunderous applause. He was there to talk about his latest film, a passion project years in the making. The audience was electric, thrilled to see one of cinema's greatest talents in person. Denzel settled into the guest chair with his characteristic grace, smiling warmly as the cheers died down. Jon Stewart leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk, the one that usually signaled he was about to go for a joke. But tonight, something felt different. There was an edge to his energy, a cockiness that seemed more pronounced than usual. "So Denzel," Stewart began, "you're here to talk about your new movie. Another one of those serious, dramatic films where you play the hero, right?" Denzel nodded, still smiling. "Well, I wouldn't call him a traditional hero. He's a complex character dealing with real issues that affect real communities." Stewart waved his hand dismissively. Right. But let's be honest. How many of these do you need to make? Don't you ever just want to do something fun? Something that doesn't require us to think so hard?" The audience laughed nervously. Denzel's smile tightened slightly, but he remained composed. "I think stories that make us think are important. Cinema has the power to shine a light on things people might not see otherwise." Sure, Stewart interrupted, leaning forward now. "But isn't that a little self-important? I mean, you're making movies, not curing cancer." The laughter from the audience was more uncertain now. Denzel straightened in his chair. "With respect, John, I never claimed to be curing cancer, but I do believe in the responsibility that comes with this platform. The stories we tell matter." Stewart's smirk widened. "The responsibility," he says. "Come on, Denzel. You're an entertainer. You dress up, you say lines someone else wrote, you collect a paycheck. Let's not pretend it's more profound than that." The audience had gone quiet. The air in the studio shifted palpably. Denzel's expression remained calm, but his voice carried a new weight. "Is that really how you see the work that artists do? That we're just puppets collecting paychecks?" "I'm just saying," Stewart continued, clearly enjoying himself now. "Maybe you take yourself a little too seriously. Not everything has to be a message. Not every film has to be some grand statement about society." Denzel leaned forward slightly. "I never said everything has to be anything. But when I choose projects, I choose them with purpose. That's my right as an artist and as a man." Stewart laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the tension. "Your right as an artist. Listen to that. You know what I think? I think maybe you've been praised so much for so long that you've forgotten how to just relax and have fun with it." The insult hung in the air. Several audience members gasped audibly. Denzel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure with visible effort. "John, I came here tonight as a guest on your show to have a conversation. But what you're doing right now isn't a conversation. You're being disrespectful." "Disrespectful?" Stewart leaned back again, spreading his hands. "I'm just being honest. Isn't that what we're supposed to do here? Have honest conversations?" "Honest conversations require mutual respect," Denzel replied, his voice steady but firm. "They require listening, not just talking at someone." Stewart rolled his eyes dramatically for the audience. "Oh, here we go. Now I'm not being respectful enough. Should I bow? Should I treat you like royalty?" "You should treat me like a human being," Denzel said quietly, "like someone who deserves basic courtesy." The audience was completely silent now, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. Stewart seemed to realize he had an audience watching, and rather than backing down, he doubled down. "You know what your problem is, Denzel. You can't take a joke. Everything is so serious with you. Maybe that's why you only do these heavy, self-important films. You've forgotten how to lighten up. Denzel shook his head slowly. There's a difference between joking and being deliberately insulting. You've crossed that line. Oh, I've crossed a line, Stewart mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The great Denzel Washington thinks I've crossed a line. Well, this is my show. These are my questions. If you don't like it, maybe you're on the wrong couch. That was the moment. The audience collectively held its breath. Denzel sat perfectly still for 3 long seconds, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly and deliberately, he stood up. You're absolutely right, Denzel said, his voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. I'm on the wrong couch. Stewart's smirk faltered. Wait, what are you doing? I'm leaving, Denzel stated simply, beginning to remove his microphone. I came here to have a respectful conversation about work I'm proud of. Instead, you've spent the last several minutes insulting me, my choices, and my profession. Come on, don't be so sensitive, Stewart said, but his cockiness was cracking now. I'm just doing my job. Denzel paused, fixing Stewart with a steady gaze. Your job is to interview guests, not to demean them. There's a way to be funny without being cruel. There's a way to ask challenging questions without being disrespectful. You chose not to do either of those things tonight. Sit down, Denzel, Stewart said, and now there was an edge of desperation in his voice. We're in the middle of a show. No, Denzel replied calmly. We're done. The audience was frozen, unsure whether to clap, to protest, or to remain silent. Some people started to stand, as if wanting to show support. Others sat with their hands over their mouths in shock. Stewart tried to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears Denzel Washington can't handle a little back and forth. Denzel stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back. This wasn't back and forth, Jon. Back and forth implies both people are participating. What you did was use your position as host to take shots at someone who came here in good faith. That's not comedy. That's not even good television. That's just a person with a microphone being mean because he can. I wasn't being mean, Stewart protested, but his voice lacked conviction now. I was being provocative. That's what I do. There's a difference between provocative and disrespectful, Denzel countered. Provocative makes people think. What you did tonight just made people uncomfortable. Look at your audience. Several cameras panned across the crowd. Faces were tight with discomfort. Some people were shaking their heads. Others looked angry. No one was laughing. Stewart tried one more time, his voice taking on a pleading quality. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you sit back down and we can start over? Denzel considered this for a moment, then shook his head. No, because nothing has changed. You haven't apologized. You haven't acknowledged that maybe you went too far. You're just trying to save face because you realize this looks bad. Of course it looks bad, Stewart snapped, his frustration showing through. You're walking off my show in the middle of an interview. I'm walking off your show because you made it impossible for me to stay, Denzel corrected him. You created this situation, not me. The audience began to murmur, conversations breaking out across the studio. Stewart looked around wildly, as if seeking support, but found none. Even his own staff members were exchanging uncomfortable glances. This is unbelievable, Stewart muttered, running a hand through his hair. I've had presidents on this show, world leaders, and they could all handle tough questions. Tough questions are fine, Denzel said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I've answered tough questions my entire career. But you didn't ask tough questions. You made dismissive comments about my work, my choices, and my character. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just a host with an inflated ego who thinks his platform makes him untouchable. The words landed like a bomb. Stewart's face flushed red. Inflated ego? You're calling me egotistical? That's rich coming from someone who won't even sit through one interview without storming off. I'm not storming off, Denzel replied evenly. I'm making a choice to remove myself from a situation where I'm not. Being treated with basic respect. That's not ego. That's self-respect. And it's something everyone should practice, regardless of who's sitting across from them. A smattering of applause broke out in the audience. It started with one person, then another, then spread until nearly half the studio was clapping. Stewart looked stunned, staring out at his own audience as they showed support for his guest over him. "Unbelievable," Stewart said again, shaking his head. "My own audience." "Maybe that should tell you something," Denzel suggested quietly. "Maybe it should tell you that people recognize when someone is being mistreated, even in the name of entertainment." Stewart opened his mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his career, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. The camera operators didn't know where to point their lenses. The producers in the booth were likely panicking, unsure how to salvage the situation. Denzel began walking toward the exit once more. This time, no one tried to stop him. The audience members who had been applauding stood up, their applause growing louder. Others joined them until more than half the studio was on their feet, clapping for a guest who was walking off the show. "Wait," Stewart called out, and something in his voice had changed. The cockiness was gone. He sounded almost vulnerable. "Denzel, wait." Denzel paused, but didn't turn around. "You're right," Stewart said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. "I was disrespectful. I was trying to be edgy and provocative, and I crossed a line. I crossed several lines." Denzel turned slowly. "Go on." Stewart swallowed hard. "I use this desk as a shield sometimes. I use the fact that I'm the host to say things I wouldn't say if we were just two people having a conversation. And tonight, I took that too far. I took that way too far." The audience had quieted again, watching this moment unfold with rapt attention. Denzel studied Stewart for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate you saying that," Denzel finally replied. "But an apology doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't change the fact that you thought it was acceptable to treat a guest that way in the first place." "You're right," Stewart agreed, nodding. "And I understand if you still want to leave. I wanted you to know that I recognize I was wrong." Denzel considered this. The entire studio held its breath, waiting to see what he would do. Several long seconds passed, seconds that felt like hours. "I'm still leaving," Denzel said finally. "Not because I don't accept your apology, but because I think it's important that there are consequences. You can't treat people badly and then just say, 'sorry,' and expect everything to go back to normal. That's not how respect works." Stewart nodded, looking down at his desk. "I understand." "I hope you do," Denzel said, "because you have a powerful platform here. You reach millions of people. And the way you treat guests, the way you conduct these conversations, that matters. It sets a tone. It tells people what's acceptable and what isn't." "I hear you," Stewart said quietly. Denzel looked out at the audience one last time. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I hope maybe something good can come from it. I hope people see that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means walking away from something." The applause that erupted was deafening. The entire audience was on its feet now, every single person clapping and cheering. Some were crying. Others were shouting words of support. The ovation lasted for nearly a full minute as Denzel Washington walked off the stage with his head held high. Stewart sat at his desk, alone, the sound of applause that wasn't for him washing over the studio. He looked small suddenly, diminished. The camera lingered on him for a moment before cutting away. Behind the scenes, staff members rushed to figure out how to fill the rest of the show. Producers debated whether to cut the segment entirely or to air it. Denzel was already in his car, heading home, his phone buzzing with messages of support from colleagues and friends who had heard what happened. In the studio, Stewart still sat at his desk. He looked out at the audience, which was slowly settling back into their seats. The energy in the room completely changed from when the show began. "Well," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I guess we need to go to commercial." The lights dimmed. The cameras stopped rolling. And in the sudden quiet that followed, everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something significant. Not a typical celebrity interview gone slightly wrong, but a genuine moment of confrontation, consequence, and dignity. Denzel Washington had come to promote a film. Instead, he had given a masterclass in self-respect, in knowing your worth, and in refusing to accept mistreatment regardless of the circumstances. He had shown that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away. And Jon Stewart, for all his wit and intelligence and success, had learned a hard lesson about the difference between being provocative and being cruel, between pushing boundaries and crossing lines, between using your platform to challenge people and using it to demean them. The show went to commercial, but that moment, that confrontation, would echo far beyond that studio, far beyond that night. It became a lesson in how we treat each other, in the importance of respect, and in the courage it takes to stand up and say enough is enough. Because at the end of the day, no matter who you are, no matter what platform you have, no matter how many people are watching, there is never an excuse for treating another human being with anything less than basic dignity and respect. And when someone forgets that lesson, sometimes it takes someone with the courage and conviction of Denzel Washington to remind them. The commercial break ended. Stewart returned to his desk, visibly shaken. He looked into the camera and spoke words that seemed to come from a place of genuine reflection. "Before we continue," he said, his usual bravado completely absent, "I need to say something. What you just witnessed, what happened with Denzel Washington, that was real. That wasn't planned. That wasn't a bit. And the responsibility for what happened lies entirely with me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I pride myself on being provocative, on asking tough questions, on not letting people off easy. But tonight, I confused being provocative with being disrespectful. I confused pushing someone with putting them down. And a guest, someone who came here in good faith, felt he had no choice but to leave. That's on me." The audience was silent, listening to every word. "I don't know if Denzel is watching this," Stewart continued, "but if he is, I want to say again that I'm sorry. Not just sorry that it happened, but sorry for my behavior, for my words, and for creating an environment where you felt disrespected. You deserved better. Our audience deserved better. And I failed both of you tonight." He looked down at his notes, then pushed them aside. "We're going to continue with the show, but I wanted to acknowledge what happened. Because pretending it didn't happen, moving on like everything is fine, that would be worse than what I already did. So, yeah, that happened. I messed up, and I'm genuinely sorry." The audience applauded, but it was a different kind of applause. Quieter. More thoughtful. The kind of applause that acknowledges growth rather than celebrates success. As the show continued, everyone in that studio knew something had shifted. A line had been drawn, a standard had been set, and all because one man had the courage to stand up, to speak his truth, and to walk away when walking away was the only option left. Denzel Washington never came back to finish that interview. He didn't need to. He had already said everything that needed to be said, not with a long speech or a dramatic confrontation, but simply by refusing to accept being treated poorly, by showing that respect isn't negotiable, that dignity isn't something you compromise on, and that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is knowing when to leave.